But really, I would like to start collecting comments on this, and I'm sure that you can help. And public procurement of medical devices, a structural analysis on Italian data. Why do we address this sector, so public procurement in this sector? Because as you can see reading these numbers, market for medical devices is really a huge market. It's a large business, and 79% of health expenditure is public through tenders, and it is usually managed at local level. Okay. In Europe, and as we will see in Italy, because our data set refer to Italy, we have usually different public hospitals. You know that in Europe, health is mainly managed at public level, differently from the US. And what we notice, at least in our data set, but it is really something that went on the newspaper, so it's not just our evidence. We have that several public hospital and local health units pay very much different prices for the same medical device. Okay, medical devices could be very complex, so stuff in which you have innovation, like stent for the heart, but you can be, they could be also very simple syringes, bandages, or simple stuff. And what we will refer in this empirical analysis, we will refer to the simpler one. Okay. Why it is relevant to address the public procurement in this field? Because it's a time of tight budget, and it is important, in our view, to understand why different public hospitals pay different prices for the same goods, for the same medical devices. So, what is the motivation? What is the research? This is the motivation, but the research question is to empirically investigate the role of cost, of marginal cost in these very simple medical devices, and competition, so how much competition affects the final price, versus, and this is something that it's referring to my previous presentation, the public buyer ability in managing this public procurement. As you have noticed, public procurement is really a regulated procedure, so could be very complex. And the public buyer could affect, through its ability, the outcome of this process. And moreover, what we want to do is to explore the determinants of this public buyer ability. And we do this because, not by chance, but because we have an exogenous policy change in the period in which we run our empirical investigation. Now, just a few words about the literature we refer to. We refer to the topic of hospital purchasing, and as I mentioned before, there is this very large difference in between what is going on in purchasing in the US, where you have business-to-business market, mainly because you have private hospitals, so the private hospital is buying from a private firm, so this is a B2B market. And in this field, we have at least two relevant investigations by Grennan. One is American Economic Journal, and the other one is Management Science, quite recent, and in which they show how relevant is the hospital bargaining ability in this kind of negotiation, in this private procurement. In this respect, it is also relevant to me to mention this paper by Giancarlo Spagnolo, in which he really stressed what is how much could affect the procurement outcome, the level of flexibility which is in the procurement procedure. Okay? And as I mentioned before, this could be very large when you compare private with public procurement. When we move to the European health system, we see that government play a large role, and there are papers in health policy in which they show the large number of regulation in the different countries, and there are some working papers about the different awarding mechanisms which are adopted in this sector running public procurement. This is the first strand of literature we think to contribute to. The second one is maybe somehow more interesting. It's about misbehavior in public procurement. Here we have the reference to the very well-known paper by 3 Italian colleagues, Bandiera, Pratt, and Valletti. It is American Economic Journal 2009, and they really have a very good idea and a very good data set, because they went with their empirical analysis. They were able to distinguish between active and passive waste, where the active waste could be really thought as corruption, while the passive waste could be really thought as lack of ability, okay, of public administration. And what is nice is that they found that in Italy, the active waste is really the largest one. Is 85% of the difference in prices is could be referred to active waste. So this is to stress how could be relevant the lack of ability then, and how could this affect the procurement outcome. Then there is a quite old paper by Di Tella, and the other one is very difficult to pronounce, Shargorowski's, Journal of Law and Economics 2003. They have a similar setting like the one we have, because they have data on hospital in Buenos Aires, and they investigate the purchasing of medical devices, because basic inputs like sealing, bandages, and whatever, during a crackdown in corruption. And what their main aim was to test the Baker-Stigler hypothesis, which is, in a nutshell, that you could have lower corruption when you have higher wages and some random monitoring. Okay, so they went on with their empirical analysis just to test this kind of stuff. So they have this monitoring, while we will have, as you will see, in some sort of reference prices as the event which could help in the empirical evaluation of what is going on. Now, a few words about the institutional setting. Our data refers to the healthcare system, which is the Italian one, which is organized in 3 levels, national, regional, and local. What is really relevant for this kind of procurement is the regional one, because at the regional level, they decide how much resources to spend in the different hospital and local health unit. And we have around 800 public buyers in Italy, and everyone has some freedom to buy this kind of medical devices. So there is a sort of decentralization, and they have obviously responsibility in what they buy. How they do with procedure, awarding procedure, like first prize auction, but they also use scoring rule, and these are increasingly used. They also have negotiation, direct negotiation. Sometimes they organize not the auction for a single good, but they put together in lots certain amount of the different goods, and they ask for offer for the entire lots. A few words about the policy change we will exploit. The subject is reference price. What is reference price? Reference price is a sort of ceiling price for each unit of each medical device, and this kind of reference price has been set by the national authority for classes of functional homogeneous product, and the local buyer should adopt this kind of reference price when this policy was working to buy that kind of product. So there is when this policy is working, is active, the public buyer, if he wants to buy that kind of seating and there is the reference price, should describe the auction saying that he could buy that kind of good, but the price cannot be higher than the reference price. Okay. So this reference price is calculated by the Central Procurement Authority, and in July 2012 they went in action from January 2013 to May 2013, when a regional court decided that they have to stop because they were not good enough in terms of because they were too heterogeneous, all the product in the same class. Okay, a few words about the data set. As I mentioned before, these are the products that we have, and we have 1 year data for 1 year. We have this kind of decentralized procurement and this number of observation. We have all these products which are divided into classes of homogeneous product, and there is a unitary price for a single good. We know from our data set which kind of awarding procedure has been adopted to buy that good. We know how many competitors were in bidding in that auction. We know the identity and a few stuff about the public buyer, so we will exploit as I will show you. We know the quantity which has been bought and when the tender has when the awarding mechanism started, ended, and so on and so forth. Then about the public buyer, we collect the financial statement, which are open information from the web. We have total revenues, total cost for the personnel, both in terms of number of doctors and number of people working in the administration. So health-related and not health-related personnel. Then we have the cost for procurement of health-related goods and services. Now, to run our analysis, we drop classes of observation classes of goods with less than 10 of observation. Okay, so the observation is the tender. Okay, which could be first price, second price, or scoring rule or negotiation. And we end up with a smaller number of awarding procedure. In this data set, we have 135 public buyers, and they are spread in over 20 Italian regions. We have 76 classes of products and 89 different suppliers, which are in this kind of tender which went on. And yes, okay, we have some heterogeneity about the tenders, so we have some scoring rule. The difference is first price auction and almost 700, more than 700 direct negotiations. So we will use also this information to control about what is going on. Okay, this is the example that one of my co-authors likes very much. I do not like at all, but okay. This is, I have to read here, Luer cone syringe, eccentric cone, capacity milliliters 20, and with all this kind of information. So this is the kind of medical devices we have. So we have really very specific classes of medical devices. And as you can see, this is the unitary price. And you can see that in our data set, this kind of medical devices has been awarded with very, very different prices, okay, at unitary prices. So the idea is simpler to investigate why there is this differences for the same good in Italian market and for the different public buyers. Now, what do we do in this paper? First of all, we do the marginal cost structural estimation, and for this kind of structural estimation, I will not give you a lot of details, but what is relevant is to keep that we use only the first price auction. Why? Because in the first price auction, we have that everyone competes just on the price, okay? So that is the relevant information we need for the estimate, while if we try to use the scoring rule, we do not have the way to keep the structural estimate for the cost from a scoring rule. We adapt this kind of estimate for having in our data set heterogeneous good and some noisy signal on competition, because remember we have sealed auction. So when the firm is participating in the auction, the firm doesn't know how many competitors will be in that auction. This is different if you have any auction, because through the auction you can just see how many others competitors will participate, and so you adjust step by step. In this kind of auction, you have just one bid, okay? Then what we do, we define the public buyer ability in each auction, which is our observation, as what? As the unitary price minus the marginal cost. Marginal cost determined in the first phase, okay? And we take this ability as a fixed effect, and then and we calculate for this difference for all the markets in this database, and then for each public buyer, and then we try to investigate this kind of fixed effect, which is our idea of ability, with the balance sheet data for each public buyer that we collected, as I mentioned before. And finally, what we do is to investigate the impact of these reference prices on the ability. How we do this? Since we have in our database a period in which this reference price worked, while and then we have a period in which they went cancelled out, we compare the effect they had on the same goods in the two different periods for the same contracting authority. Okay? Any question? Okay, good. Let's start with the simple stuff on the setup. We start with this public hospital local health unit. So the public buyer for us is the hospital or the local unit, okay? The local health unit. And we have a class of homogeneous devices, and we have firms which are participating in the tendering process, whatever it is, if scoring rule, if first price, if negotiation, with this kind of profit function in which we have that the usual markup between price and marginal cost times the quantity sold, where P is the awarding unitary price, CD is the cost function for each medical devices, and then we have the cost function, which is related to the type, the supplier type, which is unidimensional. Now, using the equilibrium bid in the first price auction, which is this formula, and then using Gerr, Perrine, Wong, and for another part, Ate and Haley, what we are going to do, but as I mentioned, I will not put in the detail in this part, we are going to calculate the marginal cost, and running this kind of procedures, we had this marginal cost for each class of medical device. Okay? Here we have the first 10 classes of medical devices. Here you have the price in the auction we observe, in the tender we observe, minimum, maximum, and then we have this marginal cost estimate. Then, coming back to our setting, we have that the price, which is for each medical device bought by the hospital H at time t, is equal to the marginal cost by the supplier plus, this is psi, I think, psi dht, okay? So this, we are interested in this psi, okay? And we think that the markup between the price and the marginal cost, which is psi, depends in a part from some specific elements of the product and the auction, okay? And from another part, it depends on the ability of the public buyer that we address as a hospital fixed effect. In particular, this psi is, we assume that this psi is the final result of two effects. This gamma h, which is this sort of ability, which is which is taken by the hospital fixed effect, and then some residual about the single product at that time. Okay? Yes.
Is the P reference price or
the real price?
Okay.
So this is. You have to cooperate. You can choose between PCP and IP. No, this is the final price, so the winning price. Okay, so what we observe. Okay, this is what we estimate, the structural marginal cost. And this difference, we assume that is this phi psi dht, which is made by a fixed effect and something related to that kind of product and auction. Okay. Now, this is again our psi, and we estimate this specific component with this OLS regression, where we have the quantity purchased. Then we have the public buyer dummy H with this gamma H. Then here you can see it enters this RHT, which is the presence of reference price. Here could be 0 or 1. It depends if it is present or not. Okay, so we have this kind of effect. Then we have a dummy for the medical device, and all this regression is run for the data set in which we consider our public buyer, hospital or local public health units, which have at least 10 observations otherwise. What we observe is that this kind of gamma H, which is what we interpret as a public buyer ability, is highly significant. Yes. Yes.
How much of this high significance of gamma H is dependent on the assumption that it's multiplicatively separable? Because if you take a different assumption, it might no longer be significant. Is that a possibility?
I think we did some We run a different type of interaction, but for that psi, but I don't remember, to be honest. So maybe we can check later on and think about. If we plot this this public buyer ability, excluding the smallest public buyers, we have this kind of picture. So if you see, there are some parts which are not present. So this northwest, this part in the center, this part in the south. These are places where we do not have observation. But what is interesting is that there is quite differences you can capture by the colors in this kind of public buyer ability according to the regional area in which they are located. Somehow this is not new for Italy because we have the usual north-south divide at the institutional level, so we were not really surprised by this kind of result. What we want to do now is to move on in investigating if there is something specific of this public buyer ability which could help, in addressing then policy to make this public procurement more efficient, okay? And, okay, this is exactly what we try to do. And here we have the regression with OLS and IV of the proxy for ability on a set of explanatory variables. And as I mentioned before, we have this some information from the balance sheet of these public buyers. And this is an information we get from the original database. That is, if the observation is referring to a scoring rule or a direct award, so direct negotiation. Obviously, the other one is first price auction. Then we have this kind of variable for potential scale economy. So how large is the number of value of medical devices that went bought in that tender. Then we have information from this database we collect on public buyers. We have personnel in terms of health personnel and non-health personnel, and we use this kind of information to have some elements about the size of the public buyer, because usually the larger the number of the health personnel and the larger is the hospital or the local health unit, okay? But we use also as control, as you will see in a while. Then we have other control variables, which is related to the location of these public buyers, not only in the north or south, but also if they are located in a metropolitan or a rural area. And moreover, as I mentioned at the very beginning, we also control for the health expenditure per capita in the region, because in some region, the health expenditure is per capita is very large, while in others it's very different and smaller. This is always related to other issues like the depth of that region or previous arrangement in the region by itself. But we want to control for that. Now, I move to the results, which are in two tables, and then I will discuss about the reference price. What we observe here is that the first, second model, we have the OLS and the first instrumental variable. And we have that here the kind of awarding procedure is relevant when we adopt this kind of model. And you see the health purchases is positive the health personnel enter with a negative signs. So it means that in this case it means that the number of people which is working in that public buyer, in that hospital, and they belong to the health personnel, has a negative effect on the ability of the public buyer. Okay, this is differently. The non-health personnel has a positive ability, so the larger the number of administrative official working in that hospital, and the higher is the ability, and so on. But what we notice is that there is something going on with the center, the geographical stuff, and in particular, we are not convinced by the result on the mechanism which are adopted, because in the literature we have that when the scoring rule are used, the effect on the final price is to increase it. Okay? Why? Do you know what is a scoring rule? A scoring rule is an auction in which you have not only the price but also some quality elements, and you weight this kind of different part. Okay? So for instance, the usual scoring rule to buy some stuff with quality is to put, at least for this kind of auction, is to put 60% weight on the price and 40% weight on all the elements of quality. Okay? For instance, if you have a scoring rule for a canteen, you could put that there is a 60% weight for the price of each meal, okay, every day, plus 40% about how distant you are from cooking your stuff from the place where you have to bring the stuff for children or whatever. Okay? Why? Because you think that the closer you are, the closer you cook, and the less you have to, to make it warmer again, and so the food is better, and so on and so forth. You can put all these kind of elements in that scoring rule. And usually, as I mentioned before, in the literature we find that when you use a scoring rule, the price is affected in the sense that is higher, while here we have the opposite. So what we do, we put this part on geographical effect, and we see that this is we put this part on the geographical center south, and we have that indeed this allow for structural breaks, and we have results which somehow are expectable. So now we have the scoring rule with the right sign. Then we have that the relationship between the health purchases enters in a negative with a negative sign, and this is by the way in which we define the ability. Then the difference between the model 3 and the model 4 is simply that we add these different controls for the cost of personnel, in particular having the cost of personnel by itself, and then all the personnel, so health and non-health personnel, and then we have this control for non-health personnel over the total cost, and we have this kind of result. When we do the interaction between scoring rule and the center south and all the others with the center south, we have further results that, as you can see, will affect this kind of result in this part of the table, in many cases changing the sign. So we are still thinking about how to interpret this result. So I'm back to this part, and I also open to your question. Yes?
I don't actually understand. How do you include in the same regression health purchases and health expenditure per capita? They might be highly correlated, I think.
Okay, this is by each public buyer, okay? While this is the health
region.
expenditure by at regional level for all. Okay.
Yeah,
So
yeah, I see.
this is some sort of regional policy indicator, while this is the choice by the each public buyer.
And maybe I didn't catch about dependent variable. You
Yeah.
meant its abilities, but how do you measure them? By what?
This is the ability, which is the fixed effect. We have the public buyer fixed effect we had before. Yes, this one.
So
Is
the
the-
differences
Okay, this is the
between
definition of
price
ability, which
and
is, yeah,
marginal cost.
sorry?
Difference between price and
The price from the auction minus the marginal cost
Marginal
we
cost.
have calculated
okay.
for each medical devices through first price auction in the same data
Yeah,
set.
so I see. Thank
Okay.
you very much.
You're welcome. Yes,
What's the instrumental variable here?
sorry?
That IV stands for instrumental variable?
Yes. Okay, I have. No, because we went through many, so I have to see which are those which are in this. So we have we have instrument for the two awarding procedure. So for a scoring rule and direct award, and we have the fraction of multi-product auction because. Sometimes, as I mentioned, the public buyer is not buying one good, but lots of goods. Then we have the number of auctions where the public buyer managed to procure not only for itself, but also for other local health units or other public buyers. That is a sort of measure of experience. So sometimes one buyer is endorsed with this kind of, because he did many times. Then we have a dummy for regions with additional constraint. For instance, we have regions, as I mentioned before, with excessive debt, and so they have a sort of ceiling on health expenditure, or they cannot do something for the next 3 months, and maybe we have that period in our data. Okay.
Do you test the validity of this regime?
Yes, yes, there are all the tests in our paper through the different tests and it comes that they all correlate with the two mechanism variable, but not with the error term. So we had several of this kind of tests. Yes.
Do you also have observations where the marginal cost is higher than the price?
No.
Because
I think not.
the reference price is set at central level.
Yes.
So no observations?
Now let me think
You're
about.
taking the natural logarithm this then.
Yes.
Yeah.
Let me think if we have. But if the reference price, if the reference price is working, it couldn't be. Because when they do the auction with the reference price, the rule is that the winning price cannot be higher than the reference price. Okay. But the point, and we will see later on what is going on with the reference price, because we have another regression with the reference price. Okay. So we are still thinking about how to interpret this result. What it seems that it comes is that we have for sure this strong regional effect for the south, but as I mentioned before, it is not new. What is new somehow is that there is this scale effect in terms of health purchasing, which is positive at regional level, and it is negative at local level, but then it changes the sign when we control for the center-south geographic variable. Then we have that for the north, we have that as we could expect, that the mechanism, the scoring rule auction, increases the price. Similarly, the direct awarding increases the price, but this is not for the center-south. I can have an explanation for the first part of this result. Why? Because usually when you adopt the scoring rule, it means that the quality matters. So you tend to pay more because you want also to buy higher quality. Okay, you do not organize the competition just on the price. And similarly, it is for the direct awarding. When you use the direct awarding, it is because you really want to buy from that kind of firm because there is something special or something that you care about. And so maybe you buy, but for a higher price, and hopefully you have also higher quality. But I do not have explanation for how and why this effect it reverses for the Center-South. And moreover, there is this results about the size of administrative personnel that we found that when this administrative personnel, this kind of variable positively affect the ability, which is quite clear, but this is not in the Center-South. So it seems that in the Center-South you have a larger number of people working in the public administration for this kind of purchase, but they are doing obviously in a less efficient way. And the opposite is for the health personnel, but as I mentioned, we are still working on connecting this kind of result. Just a few words about the impact of policy change. As I mentioned before, we exploit the reference price determination. As before, we want to address the ability when there is this reference price, which could be absent or present. Okay? And what we observe, since we run a quantile regression, we observe that for the less skilled public buyer, the reference price make an even worse result. Okay? While if it does not have any impact on the medium ability public buyers, and it has some positive effect on the high ability public buyer. So we have also an explanation for this kind of effect, because the rule about reference price had a sort of safeguard measure. What was this safeguard measure? Public buyers has to apply reference price for the first tender, and if the tender went void, so no bidder entering the auction, then they could reorganize the auction without reference price. So the point is that according to our result, it seems that lower ability public buyer, they are able to attract higher cost buyers. So when there is the reference price, it is probable that the auction is void, because knowing that after the first time the auction is void, they will reorganize without the reference price. This higher cost supplier, they will not participate in the first auction, just waiting for the second one, in which the reserve price will be higher, and there is no ceiling, there is no cap to the price. Okay? While high ability public buyer, they are able to attract bidders since the first time, so they compete with this ceiling, and so in this way the reference price make this procurement process even more efficient. Just to conclude, we start from this evidence about the prices for standard medical devices, which we observe are very different for different public buyers. So our aim was to investigate if the public buyer ability matters in this kind of public procurement process, and in which way. To do this, we add to the data set on public medical devices data on information about public buyer size, personnel, and whatever, and we exploit this policy change about reference prices. Unfortunately, we do not have a lot of information about the how the reference price affect each medical devices, because in that case we could have some before and after, but we couldn't have. So we have just the simple regression I showed before, because we couldn't have detailed information about that kind of stuff. And our first result, as I have shown, are still looking for the red line, which could really connect every stuff we found. So if you have suggestions and comments, they are more than welcome. Thank you.
Thank you. Any comments, questions?
Come back to this one.
I have a question whether quality problems are common for medical devices, and as products are defined so precisely in a study, whether it is possible to distinguish between contracts on the goods with bad quality and good quality.
Mm-hmm. Okay, we went through this kind of database because this kind of medical devices are very, very simple. And so your question is really relevant if you investigate medical devices with some technology or with some quality, intrinsic quality. Here, really it is very simple stuff. So I think that since given the precise definition of the this kind of medical devices, also because of the process of reference prices and whatever, I think that quality does not affect very much. But in other cases with different medical devices, I'm sure that, and especially in the health medical product for the health system, they are really relevant, the issues related to quality.
I'm curious if you have information on the price distribution of medical devices outside of the public buyers market, whether it's related to that the market is really diverse, and whether you have a lot of competition versus more monopolistic market division in different regions of the country, which may affect the price distribution in the first place.
Okay, we didn't perform any proper analysis on the private hospital and the way in which they buy this kind of stuff, also because it is quite difficult to take information. The point is that we could try to have some sort of descriptive statistics, and this is a good point we will try to do. But in any case, it seems that for this simple stuff, there is quite a lot of competition. The problem is if the public buyer is able, to make the tender attractive for firms, with the good level of information about when the tender will happen and how to participate and to fix the right reserve price or whatever. Yes, please.
Could you please tell the policy implications of your results? So what are the takeaways for policymakers?
Yes. I don't know if they will listen us, but in any case, the idea is that if our result will be confirmed and if we are able to build the right story behind, it seems that the reference prices for this kind of goods are not to be designed. In particular, if you have a public buyer with low ability. Maybe it would be better to do some sort of procurement process in which you have centralization. That is a sort of unique big public buyer with a large ability, able to buy this kind of good and then, to distribute according to the demand of the different regional hospital. And indeed, it's something that it seems that it is going on, because at least in the region where I live, we discuss with these people working in the health system at the public regional level, and they are thinking to have a sort of unique public procurer for all the public hospital, and then to spread what they buy. Yes.
Okay, so my question is,
Yeah.
I don't know, maybe this is crazy, but could you come up with a quality indicator of how good different public buyers are, conditional on things that explain the performance of public buyers? I don't know if this could be used as a monitoring tool.
Yeah, but the ability, I think, is exactly this. Because the difference between the price and the winning price and the marginal cost, this markup, we think it is the inefficiency of the public buyer, because the more the public buyer is able to buy that stuff, the closer to the marginal cost, and the better is that public buyer in doing his business to buy this stuff. So we put the minus in front of that logarithm just to work not on the inefficiency, but in the ability or efficiency.
No, that I agree, but I was thinking that maybe like looking at the residual, the second regression you do might be interesting, because you want to compare ability, controlling in a way, conditional on some explanatory variables that so you know that an hospital in the south is gonna have worse quality than an hospital in the north. But maybe you want to control for that, so that you make kind of a comparison which is a little bit more fair. Again, here choosing the control variables is tricky, because it will have policy implications.
The problem is that our problem was that the public buyer ability could be affecting also the awarding procedure he is choosing for that kind of purchasing. So that was our main concern at this stage. What you're saying, I'm not sure, but I think that it is an interesting point, but I think we need a larger number of data to do that kind of stuff, because otherwise maybe it is not really fair enough because that was a weighted regression. So those with the public buyer with a higher number of observation, that is with a larger number of tenders, are those with weight more. So, but I think we could discuss a little bit, but I suppose that I need a larger database for that kind of stuff.
Your results seem to imply that Tuscany doesn't have high ability. I found that a little bit counterintuitive.
No.
No?
Yes, it is. But you know, after Renzi, they are doing a lot of strange stuff. No, I don't know. We can have a look later on this kind of stuff.
It has to be an average.
Do you think so?
Yes.
What is strange is this one. So, in my view. Puglia, not really, but yes. This is an Italian direct evidence about where we went to the doctor in holidays.
Yes.
Exactly.
Sorry, just a stupid last question. So maybe you know more about this, but my understanding is that there are some regions have a more right-wing approach to manage healthcare, and some regions have a more of a left-wing approach to manage healthcare. So, for instance, Lombardy is more right-wing, Tuscany is more left-wing. I don't know whether you could also add as explanatory variable whether whether healthcare management in that region is more.
I think it is captured by this health expenditure per capita.
I see.
I think because we found very large differences, and it is why we put this kind of control. Yes.
Any other questions? Then I can ask questions.
Yes.
My first questions I didn't get, I think, correctly. Whether it is the same, this reference price and marginal cost in your model, or there is the difference. how do you measure this marginal cost for each public buyer? And is there any difference with this reference price or not?
Let me see if I have all this, because I just keep all the part on how we calculate the marginal cost. Yes, it is absolutely different the way in which the marginal cost is estimated, because we start from the information, so we start from the winning price in each first price auction, while the reference price has been calculated by the Central Procurement Authority after a survey on firm cost for each different medical device. And the regional tribunal that cancelled out this reference price, the motivation to cancel out was that they were too heterogeneous. So in the same class, there were too many differences to have the same reference price. So our measure of marginal cost somehow could be better than the reference price they had, because we take it from as the winning price and we apply all this structural estimation to get it.
And do you find significant difference? Or you never try to compare them?
I don't remember what we did. Because
sorry.
No.
For this question.
No, because the point is that the way in which these classes of medical devices are different according to the time, because for the court, these classes were defined in a certain way for their analysis and for their judgment. And then there is another agency that did. So I think that we went on having some comparison with both. So I don't remember which is the result with our marginal cost estimate with the two different reference prices used. So I don't want to say something wrong. But I think we found in one of the two, we found significant differences.
Yeah, but I think it is useful to say when you're speaking about this policy implication and when you try to compare these two parts, when you have this reference price and when there is no reference
you're right,
price, because
I have to show this kind
it
of
is
stuff,
the part of your measure of these public buyer abilities, and it is interesting to understand whether it's this difference between, because they are really close in the idea of what they should be, this reference price and marginal cost. So this central authority was trying to estimate this marginal cost. And you want to argue that they could be not really efficient in this case, and they could have some, they could change incentives of the firm.
Yeah, you're right. I have to show this part at the very beginning, yes.
And one more point about this reference price that I didn't also get. Is it public for everybody or not? Or only public buyers know this price?
No, it is public.
It is public.
There is a table in the web, in the page of this Authority for Public Procurement. They published, and they say you have to apply from now on.
So it is something like open reserve price in the auctions?
Yes, something like exogenous reserve price, because it has been exogenous determined.
Okay, and maybe a last more comment than question from me. You just try to pose your work comparing with the work of Bandiera, Prat, and Valetti.
Yes.
And one of the, some skeptical guys just said that...
I have here the question. What we have to do exactly? One is active passive waste, the paper by Bandiera Valetti. We are thinking out if we can in our setting to do the disentangle between the two.
Yeah, and some skeptical guys think that the offers give too much honor to CANSIP, because one of the offers is from CANSIP agency. And one of the points of Spanola 2012, that in this paper and in your, as I understand too, they just look only on a what process, and if you want to capture these active and passive waste, you also should look at the process of the fulfillment of the contracts.
Yes.
So it's okay to have a really small price in the what proceeding, but what is going on when you sign a contract and when you try to fulfill? And the argument of Janka was that there is a high percentage of this delivery not on time, as I remember clearly.
Time overrun.
Yeah, time overrun, and it is impossible to cover this cost even in the court system, because it is really expensive and not efficient. So maybe the argument is not so clear that we, when we are speaking about this public barrier ability and just looking only at the price, especially if we are speaking about health care sector, because the time is really matter in healthcare sector. You couldn't say, please wait a little bit, don't die. I need some time to search for some goods.
In some way you are right, but at the same time consider that here we have very simple stuff, syringes, bandages. Is not something that if I do not have, you are going to die. Okay, that is the point. But in any case, you are absolutely right in saying that in investigating ability, we would have not only to consider the awarding price, but we have also to consider all the ex post awarding. This is even more relevant in construction, this kind of procurement, while in this kind of furniture, like simple medical devices, maybe they are not so relevant. But for sure, the contracting authority ability, the public buyer ability, is very much to be addressed also in the monitoring through the execution phase, especially when you have a construction or something that some services which should be delivered or something like that. So you're right. But you see, we have a still open question, and one is the first point you referred to about the Bandiera Valletti and Pratt paper. So.
Okay, I think we can
if you have any suggestion, we can also discuss it in the coffee break.
We could continue later to discuss this. So thank you, Paola.
Thank you very much.